Rodrigo Duterte's rise to power in 2016 was fueled by bold promises. He pledged to eradicate drugs and criminality from the Philippines. Duterte's campaign rhetoric resonated with a public weary of rising crime. He promised swift and brutal action, even at the cost of due process and human rights. His words would become reality. The war on drugs began soon after he took office, unleashing a wave of violence that would define his 6-year term. Duterte openly encouraged the police and even ordinary citizens to take the law into their own hands. He promised immunity to those who killed suspected drug users and dealers. This policy, coupled with his inflammatory language, created a climate of fear and impunity. The streets of the Philippines transformed into killing fields. Duterte's supporters argued that his methods were necessary. They claimed that the Philippines was on the brink of becoming a narco state. They pointed to a decrease in crime rates as evidence of his success. However, these claims were often based on incomplete data or manipulated statistics. Independent verification was scarce, and the government tightly controlled information. The Philippine National Police proudly presented statistics showing a significant reduction in crime during Duterte's presidency. They claimed that his iron-fisted approach had made the country safer. Murders, robberies, and other serious crimes, they argued, had plummeted. The government used these figures to justify the human cost of the drug war. However, these claims were met with skepticism by human rights groups and independent observers. They argued that the PNP's data was unreliable and likely manipulated to fit the government's narrative. There were credible reports of police falsifying evidence, planting drugs on victims, and manipulating crime statistics. Furthermore, the focus on drug-related killings masked a potential increase in other types of crime. With police resources diverted to the drug war, other areas of law enforcement may have been neglected. This could have led to an increase in crimes that did not fall under the purview of the drug war. While the debate over the effectiveness of Duterte's methods raged on, one thing was undeniable: the staggering loss of human life. The government's own figures admitted to over 6,000 deaths in police operations. However, human rights groups estimate the real number to be much higher, potentially tens of thousands. The victims were overwhelmingly from poor and marginalized communities. They were often killed without trial, denied due process, and labeled as criminals without evidence. The methods used were brutal and often amounted to extrajudicial killings. The police, emboldened by Duterte's rhetoric, operated with near impunity. The international community condemned Duterte's drug war. The United Nations called for an end to the killings and investigations into human rights abuses. The International Criminal Court opened an investigation into crimes against humanity. Duterte responded with defiance, withdrawing the Philippines from the ICC and dismissing international criticism as interference in the country's affairs. Duterte's presidency ended in 2022, but the violence he unleashed continued to cast a long shadow over the Philippines. His successor, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., promised a less bloody approach to drug enforcement. However, killings continued, albeit at a lower rate. Then, in a stunning turn of events, Duterte was arrested in Manila on March 11, 2025. The ICC, which had issued a warrant for his arrest, had finally caught up with him. His arrest sent shockwaves through the Philippines and the international community. Duterte's legacy is complex and deeply contested. His supporters continue to praise him for his tough stance on crime and his efforts to restore order. They argue that his methods, though harsh, were necessary to address a national crisis. However, his critics argue that his legacy is one of violence, impunity, and the erosion of democratic institutions. The true cost of his war on drugs, both in human life and damage to Philippine society, may not be fully understood for years to come.